think I see it going right across my deck here now. I did not right up in his vicinity, but no, I didn't. So this is good too, Roger. Thanks for that information, sir, and I'll get back to you if we come up with anything. Over.
Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Breakers, a podcast about shipwrecks, loss, and lessons learned from maritime disasters. My name is Taylor, and I'll be your host today, and joining me in just a moment, it will be Tanner. But first, let's thank our patrons, our new patrons. Today we have Oliver. Thank you very much for signing up. Hope you enjoyed the bonus content. Hope you enjoyed the Guadalcanal series. That was a lot of fun to put together. A lot of good stuff there. If you're not a patron, definitely think about it. Check it out. There's a lot of good content if you enjoy what we do. With that being said, let's go ahead and bring in Tanner. Tanner, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm rested up after our long break from recording and my 2 weeks of vacation from work.
I was going to say, is it going to be hard to go back to a job, right?
Well, not really, because I have several weeks still without students. So it will still be a lot of kind of sitting around and maybe killing a little bit of time in between vigorous spurts of work.
Nice. I guess what else has gone on since we last recorded? We actually got to see each other in person, which is a rare happening. That was nice.
That was. I don't think anything big happened geopolitically. I think
nothing at all.
There was the first night when the first morning waking up at the parents' house, checking my phone. The first place I saw this was the Freedom Road group chat, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization group chat. Before I'd even opened like Twitter or anything, saying, Maduro and his wife were kidnapped last night. So that happened.
I think I saw it at like 5 a.m. when I randomly woke up, and I think I texted you, and we were both like, "Oh shit."
So obviously, Viva la Revolución Bolivariana. Other stuff has happened in the world as well, but obviously that's been a big point of discussion. ICE continues to murder people on the streets in increasingly blatant and on-camera fashion.
Yeah.
So yeah, stuff's happening.
Stuff has happened.
Stuff has happened and is happening and probably will happen.
So to fill the gaps when things aren't happening, what have you been doing?
Doing a bit of reading with all that off time. What have I been reading? I'm finally starting the last of the main series Witcher novels.
Okay.
So it's called The Lady of the Lake. I've had it for a while. When I read the first one, I just bought like the box set of the main ones, and I was watching the show kind of in tandem with it, and I got to the most recent season of the show, and it covers stuff that's in that book, so I wanted to read that book first.
I have not watched, played, or read anything in the Witcher series.
Yeah, I got into them, I guess it was like 2 years ago at this point. I enjoy them. I have a couple of that author's other, I think it's called the Hussite trilogy. I have some of those too. I'm also reading a book called Rising Sun and Tumbling Bear, Russia's War with Japan. It's by Richard Connaughton. It's not hyper academically written. It is presented in a not leisurely, like not a relaxed type way, but it's just not as many sort of, itemized citations and things like that. It's a pretty good read. I've read a couple things. I've read a couple books on the Russo-Japanese War before. This is kind of a much more general look at it, though. So I've enjoyed that.
Nice.
Last thing is obviously college football, the bowls, the playoffs, but also to get my baseball fix in during MLB off season. I think I mentioned I was watching the Dominican League. I've also been watching the Venezuelan League.
It's going to be kind of interesting because you're going to see some of these guys like pop up in the MLB like over the next couple of years.
That, or sometimes it's older players who are still wanting to play. But Venezuela, they're in the round robin segment now. They do the playoffs in an interesting way. Rather than having, kind of your classic bracket format playoffs where you play a series, instead, it's like a couple weeks where they're playing a round robin tournament. And so they'll play a different team every day.
It's kind of like the Little League tournament.
And then the best two teams out of that play each other in the championship. there's only 8 teams in the Venezuelan league. And so half of them get into the round robin. And actually the team that I selected to root for, Magallanes, they did not have a good start to the season.
Mm-hmm.
And they fired their manager and they hired Yadier Molina as their manager.
Oh, I know that name.
The NL Central fan in me was not jazzed.
Do not like Yadier Molina.
Turns out he's a pretty good manager because they were like the worst team in the league. And he turned them around to the point that they actually made the round robin. So that was a huge, amazing, piece of work there. So something started working when Molina took over. He seems like he's a pretty good manager.
I think it's interesting in baseball more than any other sport. Players can be successful coaches, and more specifically, catchers.
Catchers, yeah, it's always the catchers
can be great managers, and I'm assuming that's because they have to know everything that's going on in the game. Like you have to be up every single pitch and know what to do.
You have to see things kind of from the batter's perspective too, as well as for the defensive perspective. Yeah, it's
just very interesting that catchers produce so many managers. I've always thought that's interesting in baseball.
I wonder if AJ Pierzynski would be a good manager.
Probably not.
We have a longer intro because this is the first of season 6.
That's true. We didn't even say that off the top. Welcome to season 6.
Yeah, this is the first episode of season 6. Welcome to season 6. Unless you've skipped past this because some asshole commented on the episode, starts at 11:15. I hate when people do that.
I do hate that.
But what have you been up to?
What have I been up to? The book I just am wrapping up now is called Policing Our Roads by Sarah A. So. And it kind of studies the evolution of law enforcement with the rise of the automobile. And it's something I've thought about a lot is like, for most people, most of your contact with law enforcement occurs because of an automobile, right?
Did you start reading this because you got a speeding ticket?
No. I've only had one speeding ticket ever, mainly because I don't want to talk to the police. So it studies that evolution and kind of how we initially struggled to regulate things and still to this day struggled to regulate things. Talking about the discretionary powers that were given to police and how with discretion basically comes preference. Like when there's no set rules, police are going to do the things they want to do.
But don't you think we could just train them better?
It reminds me.
Don't you think they could use more training, more funding?
It reminds me how we struggle to police and regulate the internet today. In that cars were such a world-changing thing, kind of in the same way the internet completely revolutionized things, and we struggle today to regulate and police the internet.
Do we? Can you use Twitter's AI to generate child sex abuse material? Is that a problem now?
Not according to Grok. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting book. It cites a lot of law and stuff and things that were established, kind of how we got to where we are now. That balance of privacy in the public domain and what is private, what is public. So it's very interesting, very good read. I would highly recommend it. It's not that long. It's a pretty easy read, but I would definitely encourage anyone to pick that up if they're interested in that. My other current obsession is Succession on HBO. I think you've already watched this, right?
Another group of assholes who play by their own rules.
It has a really excellent cast with some really interesting characters. I love the Matthew McFadden character. I actually watched him first in Death by Lightning as Gateau.
That's so weird. You're like probably one of the only people on the planet who has first seen him in Death by Lightning.
But it's funny that he kind of carries some of the same energy in both in certain scenes. It's definitely one of those shows where I have to remind myself at times that like all of these are horrible people, and in real life I would hate all of them.
You're watching Pride and Prejudice, you're like getting a lot of Death by Lightning vibes from this.
I need to watch that now to see him in a completely different role. But yeah, that's an excellent series. I'm kind of trying to like watch all the series that I neglected in the past that are supposed to be really good. Like I've knocked out Game of Thrones, I've knocked out Breaking Bad. So
have you watched The Sopranos?
I haven't. I started it, and I just wasn't the right day to start it, and I didn't get into it.
I've seen the first few episodes of it, and then little
Yeah,
bits of
it
it here
comes
and
up on
there,
my
but-
TikTok feed a lot, actually.
Mhm.
I remember thinking that The Sopranos was far funnier than I expected it to be. Like, there was a lot of comedy in it, which is something I like about
Like a lot of those mafia.
Succession.
things.
Even, I mean, has a lot of not even just surreal comedy at times, but just funny stuff. Like there's moments that
Mhm.
break the tension with comedy. So I was like a good balance. Well, with that, let's talk about something that lost its balance.
Let's do it.
Today, we are going to be talking about the ferry Rodney. It's also called the Rodney disaster. It's always good when that's the Wikipedia title of the article.
It's very apt, probably. Yeah, disaster. You're in for a good podcast when something's called the blank disaster.
It's like anytime you see something, it's like the Wollingford tragedy. Like it could be like 3 people dead or 300. Like you don't know till you read it. You know what I mean?
Like the Boston Massacre. I mean,
So let's go to the land down under, the land where the kangaroos roam, Australia,
been a while, I think.
where the
for-
koalas are full of syphilis and the snakes are deadly. Everybody thinks koalas are cute. They're not. They're gross. They're not the zoo koalas we have here.
Are they syphilitic? A
Yeah,
lot of them?
I think that's a thing. I wasn't even making that up.
All the cute animals from your childhood are just fetid creatures. Dirty, not like highly celebrated fetid. Koalas have syphilis, armadillos have leprosy.
Hold on, sorry. I don't want to be wrong. It's chlamydia.
Oh.
I have chlamydia.
Okay. I don't actually know which one of those is worse. So
I don't either. I just
well,
either
actually
way.
I do. I'm pretty sure syphilis is worse because it like eats your brain.
True.
And you start like rotting from the inside. So I think that's probably the worst one.
So, more specifically, we're going to be in Sydney. In the early 1900s, Sydney Harbor is actually home to one of the most dense ferry networks in the world. I had never really looked at a map of Sydney before, but if you pull it up even today, like there are just ferries everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I realized quite like the sprawl that Sydney has. Like it takes up a huge amount of like area. I knew Sydney was a large city, but just how large it is, and with all these little bays and coves and peninsulas, like it kind of makes sense that a ferry would be the way to go. It's like Baltimore, but like nicer and bigger.
A lot of spaces for an escaped convict to hide.
Uh-huh. I also, truth be told, didn't know that Botany Bay is like just around the corner. It's
Yeah,
like just south of Sydney.
I have a complete inability to remember where any of the big cities are in Australia except Perth, just because Perth is like the only bigger one on the western side.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with my Australian geography. So yeah, this is like a huge ferry network here in the 1900s. The earliest ferry service actually begins in 1789, shortly after the arrival of the First Fleet. That's when a small vessel provided a link between Sydney Cove and a settlement called Parramatta. This vessel is named the Rosehill Packet, and of course, it's built with convict labor.
That's what I would expect from Australia here.
It was sail and oar powered, with a round trip taking about a week. So this wasn't like a short ferry. You're in for the long haul.
Wait, it took a week to like one way on the ferry?
I think that might have been round trip.
Oh.
Yeah, that round trip would take a week. So still quite a long time on the ferry. In 1900, Sydney Ferry Lines Limited was incorporated, and it slowly began to take over the trade, eventually becoming one of the largest ferry operators in the world by fleet size and patronage. So as these things go over time, obviously, there's consolidation. One problem for the ferries, though, is that in 1932, the Sydney Harbor Bridge opens. If you don't know what it looks like, this is kind of the bridge you think of when you see those, like a shot of Sydney Harbor with the playhouse and everything in it.
The Sydney Playhouse.
Did I type that? Did I read? No, I did. Oh yeah, I did. Yeah. That's what I typed. The Playhouse. Yeah, it's the bridge you think of when you see like pictures of the Sydney Opera House and stuff like that. So it's a pretty famous bridge. The opening of the bridge is great for the citizens of Sydney. However, not so great if you're a ferry operator. Bridges are bad.
Check out the song James River Blues by Old Crow Medicine Show.
Passenger numbers quickly fell from nearly 40 million passengers to 15 million passengers a year. And that was just over the course of a few years. So you can see that bridge makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. This would cause many ferry operators to retire, lay up vessels, as demand falls. Obviously, it becomes less profitable. If you got older vessels, you're getting rid of them. And, you're not running those crews. This resulted in a pivot for many of the smaller operators that wanted to stay viable. Rather than act as a ferry, they'd run excursions and pleasure cruises around the harbor. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like, you have all this beautiful wilderness and these sights to see. Like, people will pay just to cruise around the water for a couple hours. Why not make that money instead of operating in the ferry game? So in order to better service these customers, many of the smaller vessels are fitted with rails, and they add additional seating on the roof. That roof seating kind of becomes a standard thing, right? Like if you're going on a tour and you can sit on the roof and see everything, obviously you want to do that rather than a tour that doesn't allow you to do that.
Flashback to another ferry episode we did, the one in Indonesia, where we also talked about some, in that case, rather slapdash roof seating. May have contributed to the capsizing.
Yeah, I'm sure there were some interesting ones when this business was kind of booming. In this case, the ship we'll be talking about is actually a new build, but it's in that same style, and that roof seating is very important. She was built by W.L. Holmes & Co. in North Sydney in 1937 for the Rosman fleet, which was owned by Charles Rosman. They're one of the smaller operators. They're one of these that's pivoted pretty hard into the pleasure cruising scene. This vessel will be powered by an 80 horsepower Vivian diesel engine. She's only capable of 8 knots, but that's not really a problem if you're just out seeing the sights. She's 55 feet long with a 15-foot beam. In total, she's licensed to carry 211 passengers with 151 on her main deck and 60 in the upper seating area.
Okay.
I mean, nothing at all stands out about this. She's a very typical vessel for what she would be doing. There's, scores of these out on the harbor at any time.
Only something bad happening could make her famous.
Pretty much. So pretty quickly, we're going to shift into the incident phase of this one. This brings us to the afternoon of Sunday, February 13th, 1938. The day before Valentine's Day. Also, not that long after she had been launched. She's like a year old at this point. Sydney Harbor was buzzing with excitement as the U.S. cruiser USS Louisville was preparing to depart after spending 18 days in Sydney. Did we talk about the Louisville in the Guadalcanal episodes? I know she's there. Think she's at the Battle of Rennell Island. I believe she's around.
If so, I don't even think we mentioned Rennell Island. I think just because most of the operations are aerial. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we totally skipped over that one. No, we're not doing another episode.
No, she is a participant in that in a couple years after this incident takes place. The Louisville is under command of Captain Robert Mathewson. She's a Northampton class cruiser that's on a goodwill tour. Parentheses, flexing on Japan, maybe?
Easily could be.
The Northampton class is a relatively modern class at this point. It's actually one we talked about in the Guadalcanal episodes because we weren't sure at first that it was a U.S. ship.
Yes, we thought it sounded British.
It did sound very British, but it is for Northampton, New Hampshire or something like that?
Connecticut, I think.
One of the New England places.
Hold on. I'm here. I'm on I think it was Connecticut. It was one of those places.
Somewhere that Dunder Mifflin would, in theory, have a branch.
Exactly. Somewhere up in the Northeast.
So getting back to this goodwill tour, this tour is planned for the Louisville to visit Hawaii, Samoa, Australia, and Tahiti. Kind of just the U.S. flexing its muscle a little bit, showing off its new toys in the Pacific.
It's Northampton, Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. There we go. 1938, things are starting to get a little warm in the Pacific. So she's spending some time there. While in port in Sydney, she is part of the 150th anniversary of the first fleet arriving at Sydney Cove. That first fleet is something that you heard us reference there at the beginning. I think it's basically just the arrival of the first 11 big ships that came to Sydney to kind of kick things off.
Aren't those the ships under Cook? Isn't that the first fleet?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I briefly looked at it.
I read The Fatal Shore years ago when I was in college, but I forget if that's just Cook's arrival or if that's a different fleet. Oh, no, that must be a different fleet.
Yeah, I think it has to do with establishing the colony and stuff.
Right. Okay, cool.
So, yeah, it's a pretty big celebration, though, that's been going on. She's part of it. People are excited to see, this big modern cruiser in port, too. It's like we always talk about. There's not a lot to do back in the day, so go look at the big ship. There's great fanfare and pageantry on board the Louisville as she's departing. There's 600 sailors lining her deck. There's a police boat that has a band playing. It's a pretty festive time overall. In the celebration, the waters of Sydney Harbor are filled with pleasure craft and tour boats, and they're all jockeying for the best position to view the vessel. Keep in mind, most of these boats are 50 feet. The USS Louisville is 600 feet. So she's massive compared to these other vessels that she's around.
So everyone's trying to see this ship directly or indirectly. The United States is responsible for what happens next.
One of these boats, obviously, is the Rodney. And they are skippered by the man, Charles Rosman. Rosman had been charging 1 shilling for the excursion and had 150 people on board.
What is the purchasing power of 1 shilling in 1938 Australia?
1 Australian shilling? Oh, it might not even an Australian shilling at that time, I guess.
Is it a lot of money?
I don't think so. I think it's relatively cheap. Probably, I would imagine, equivalent to $5-10 today. I think it's interesting, though, that she only has 150 people on board. She's licensed for 211. So this is not an outright overcrowding issue. Another interesting note is that many of those on board are girlfriends or other acquaintances of these sailors. I thought that was pretty interesting. These guys had spent some time in port, as young people do. Commitments get made. Things happen.
Right.
I'm sure being an American hanging out in Sydney, you're probably going to get some looks just because you're different. You're a different option.
I remember seeing that in the Pacific. Yes.
Yep. So yeah, a lot of these people actually know people on board the Louisville. So it's pretty personal. As Rosman took Rodney closer to the cruiser, those on board also tried to get the best position to view the ship.
Don't do that.
Of course, the best place to view the vessel is where? The roof. Again, the roof is limited to just 60 occupants.
But the Australians are a very independent people. You give them rules, and that's just license to break them.
So that number quickly swelled to 100 people. It kind of only stops there because there's not any more room for people to get it. People are crushed to get up in there.
We're not here to spiders. We're here to see this cruiser.
What do we know about vessel stability, particularly when it gets top heavy?
Don't go up there.
Yeah, don't make it more top heavy. Top heavy is bad.
But if it's going to capsize, you should be up there.
That's kind of the paradox, isn't it? That
it is also the safest place to be. So
inside the boat, bad. So quoting from a WA Today article titled 80 Years On, the Rodney Ferry Disaster.
Is that Western Australia?
I'm assuming. Feel free to read this in an Australian accent.
Near Garden Island, the Rodney circled the cruiser once, still with most of its passengers on the top deck, cheering and calling to the crew. Mr. Rosman was in charge of the launch, and those on board said that he had indicated that he proposed changing to the other side of the warship, passing round her stern.
As
Crikey!
As you would expect, the passengers moved all at once to the side that was closest to the Louisville. This situation was so dangerous that there's naval personnel stationed on Garden Island, and they shout a warning about the possibility of capsizing.
Was it the Baltimore water taxi one, I think, where we had something similar, where there was like naval personnel close by enough to see it struggling in the harbor, and so they were sort of
watching it, kind
of expecting they'd have to do this.
Sort of what happens here is like everyone that like knows something about like sailing is kind of like, this is not going to end well. Like, this looks potentially dangerous. Of course, a response comes from the Rodney. Don't worry, we're all right. Despite this dismissal, the naval crew continued to watch the vessel as concerns grew. So again, as you're picturing all this happening, this isn't isolated. This is in the middle of a huge event. There's a lot of ships in the water. A lot of people are seeing this happen. That also means there's a ton of pictures of this. And I think I mentioned to you before we started recording, like, one of the things that's so fascinating about seeing an older one like this so well documented is like there's actual pictures of the sinking happening. And that's not very common for something in 1938. As the Rodney passed behind the large warship, her list, combined with the wake of the Louisville, resulted in a sudden and unrecoverable loss of stability. Passengers were tossed off the vessel and slid down her slippery, slanted deck. Some were knocked unconscious and drowned once in the water. The truly unfortunate were those trapped inside the main level. Unable to break windows, they were trapped and went down to the bottom with the Rodney. One officer on board the Louisville is quoted, "It is the most ghastly thing I have ever witnessed in all my experience at sea. Everybody was so happy. We had had such a splendid time in Sydney. And then, as we're leaving, tragedy." So at this point, there's more than 150 men, women, and children fighting for survival in the water. The police launch that we had talked about before with the band, the Cambrai, it had just minutes ago been playing Old Lang Syne, and now they're having to respond to this disaster. They're actually like one of the first on the scene. 36 officers from the vessel actually strip down, toss their instruments aside, and they get in the water. The vessel also signals 4 whistle blasts, which indicates a call for assistance. Again here from the WA Times article.
Miss Winnie Dobson of 11 Bonds Road, Punch Bowl. Is that a part of Sydney? I guess.
Probably. I know in Hawaii, like, there's a place called Punch Bowl.
Okay. Miss Winnie Dobson of 11 Bonds Road, Punch Bowl, was aboard the launch with her friends. They had boarded the launch at Woolloomooloo. There were about 100 people on the boat, Miss Dobson said. We were all very happy, laughing and waving goodbye to boys on the Louisville whom we knew. We happened to be standing at the stern of the boat, and it was listing badly with a number of people on one side. Suddenly we felt it going over. We tried to run to the other side of the deck, but the slope was too much, and she slowly turned over. Next thing I knew, I was in the water, and my companions were near me. Thank heavens we were good swimmers.
I think what's interesting in a lot of these accounts is it happened slowly, but it happened quickly. Like, the list is coming on slowly, but when it happens, it happens. Mm-hmm. I think, that a lot of the stories I was reading, I just thought that was very interesting, that it was very slow until it wasn't, basically.
Something else I'd add in there is, it's come up in a few episodes, but we've commented on the fact that having a basic knowledge of swimming is something that, at least in the United States, has definitely increased over time. Because, yeah, you look at a lot of these older stories and simply a lot of people don't know how to swim.
And this is a story where being able to tread water for 5 minutes is the difference between surviving and not.
This is why they had us do that in gym class for half an hour. I mean, legitimately, but
Right.
But yeah, it is one of those cool that you could say is like a clear societal good. Having more people have this basic skill, even if you're not good at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just being able to float is something, especially in a fairly contained, calm environment like this. So reacting immediately before the call to general quarters could even sound, 7 sailors from the USS Louisville jumped from the deck to provide assistance. The crew of the Louisville also tosses life jackets into the water. They're able to launch 4 lifeboats and 2 motor launches. So, like, obviously, like, it's apparent there's these problems. The Louisville is able to respond immediately as well. And I think that makes a big difference in how many people survive here. It's just how many resources are being able to be brought to bear to try to save people. Additionally, you have the Manly ferry service boat Baron Joy, along with about 20 other small launches that are in the immediate vicinity, and they respond to this call for assistance. Quoting again from the WA Today article,
"The rescue work was carried out with remarkable coolness on the part of the police, the crews of the Manly ferry boat, and private launches, and United States naval ratings. As women and girls were screaming and throwing their arms wildly in the air, they were caught by the rescuers, some by the hair, others by their clothing. Some of the girls had their clothes torn to ribbons in the excitement."
the Louisville would take on 26 survivors. 18 of these are unconscious when taken aboard the vessel for treatment. They're attended to by naval doctors, and actually all but one would survive. The Cambrais crew would rescue 20, and the motor cruiser Solaire would rescue 15. Survivors were taken to the Man o' War Steps, which is like directly adjacent to where the Sydney Opera House is today, also known as the Sydney Playhouse. That's kind of like the triage point where they start to try to put together, survivors and figure out who are we missing. One of the things I always think is interesting is to get the reaction of survivors in the immediate aftermath. And it's not something you can always do. But in a case like this, where it's so well documented and there's so many people seeing it, fortunately we are. And in this case, it's a young woman who's actually engaged to one of the sailors on board the Louisville. I don't know. I like to think it brings a little bit of happiness to such a tragic story.
Miss Nancy Tompkins, 21 years of age, of Springfield House, Springfield Avenue, King's Cross, who arrived at the Sydney Hospital wearing a sailor's shirt, which had been given to her to keep warm after she was rescued from the water, said that she was engaged to a sailor aboard the Louisville and had gone down to see him off, and then joined the crowd of sightseers on the launch Rodney so that she would be able to wave him goodbye. Miss Tompkins' chief anxiety as she sat up at the Sydney Hospital, holding a blanket round her shoulders, over the sailor's shirt, was to let her young man aboard the Louisville know that she was safe. "I want to get in touch with Frank," she said. As the boat went over, I could see him gazing at me with a look of horror on his face. It was horrible, horrible. I've often been on launches on the harbor before, and I've often pondered what it would be like to be capsized into the water. Now I know.
I'm like a Nancy. Anytime I'm doing something, I'm like, well, what if this would happen? You know what I mean? Like, like you're going through an intersection, you're like, what if someone just ran that red light? And then well, she got to experience it, I guess.
What if a guy with an 8th grade education just shoved his handgun into my windshield and pulled the trigger 3 times directly into my head?
What if? So it's initially thought that the death toll was 27. However, 8 people labeled as missing eventually turned up as things began to sort themselves out. But the final death toll would not be confirmed until the Rodney was raised from the bottom. She would be raised on February 16th, 1938. So 3 days after she sinks. In total, 19 people had died. 17 women, 1 man, and 1 child. Granted, the numbers could be partially skewed here because it may have been a lot, skewed women just with, girlfriends, fiancés, whatever, out there to watch the vessel depart. But these numbers kind of hold true to what we always talk about, especially in older shipwrecks, that it sucks to be a woman. The numbers just don't ever come out very good.
Shipwrecks, have some particular challenges, as we've seen in these older ones.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty surprising that it was, 17 of the 19 are women in this case. The USS Louisville would continue on to Now I'm in my head about Say it.
I think the standard American pronunciation of it is Melbourne. Some people will hypercorrect and say Melbourne.
I'm not doing that.
That's simply saying it with an Australian accent. Yeah. So I think Americans would pronounce this Melbourne.
The USS Louisville would continue on to Melbourne that night. However, she would hold a memorial 2 days later in which her seaplanes would drop wreaths at sea. Additionally, some of her crew would return to Sydney the next Saturday to attend funeral services for the victims. So, obviously, this has a pretty big effect on the Louisville crew as well. This, not something you really want to be a part of. Not to mention, there's, if you're engaged or, dating one of these girls from Sydney, you don't know if they're a victim or not. So,
in a weird way, it's sort of the inverse, or the opposite of the situation we've seen a couple times, where you have a ship that spends a lot of time in a particular port and develops that relationship with the port. And typically it's the ship that is lost. Mm-hmm. Whereas here it's kind of the opposite. If we're saying Louisville is the ship, it's the people back in port who actually are in danger in this situation.
Yeah, you're right. That is an interesting way of looking at it. It is kind of the inverse. So after refloating, the Rodney was given the name Regis and returned to service. In May of 1938, she would be repossessed by Charles Rosman's creditors, although he would be allowed to rent the vessel from them and continue to operate it. On May 1st, 1939, the High Court of Australia ruled that the vessel had capsized due to negligence. Quoting from the Daily Mirror Telegraph article, "The sinking of the ferry Rodney."
A court of marine inquiry into the sinking followed on March 21st. It was headed by Judge Markle. In his evidence, the Rodney's captain said he had realized there were too many people on the top deck. He had sent a deckhand to tell some of them to come down. This was corroborated by the deckhand, who said that when he asked some of the passengers to go below, they ignored him. The court held that the accident was caused by the captain's neglect in allowing more than the regulation number of passengers on the top deck. In consequence, his certificate was suspended for 3 years. Years.
I think your Australian accent works because, unlike most Americans, you don't try to go too hard.
Well, Kelly and I talked about this on the Canuck is a Slur, because there's one quote I ended up reading in an Australian accent. I forget why.
I just need to know, what region of Australia you sound like you're from.
I'm trying to copy every Australian podcaster I've ever heard.
So, Sydney.
I guess.
Figure that's where everyone lives, right? That's where every Australian's from that I know.
Like how American podcasters are all from LA, New York, or weirdly somewhere in Ohio.
It is weird. Ohio has way too many.
Like astronauts and presidents.
Really punches above our weight. So as stated in that quote, Captain Rosman would lose his license for 3 years. That kind of doesn't seem like enough punishment. Not gonna lie.
I mean, not when he's found to be the negligent one. We've seen captains lose their license forever for that.
Yeah, I mean, killing 19 people and then getting 3 years. And, he still owns the company. He's just got to find another captain to operate the boat.
That is essentially a slap on the wrist.
So, as we said before, this did not stop him from running his ferry business, only operating the vessel. Interestingly, damages of 200 pounds were awarded to survivor Laura Nagrant. I'm not sure why she's the only one. I don't know if she had just access to a lawyer or something that other people didn't.
That is weird. That I would like to know more about.
And one of the interesting things was, if he couldn't come up with the money in a matter of, a week or two, then, the vessel would be sold, which is how his creditors ended up buying it and renting it back to him.
Huh.
It's kind of a weird situation. I tried to do a little digging to figure out why it was. all I can imagine is like they had like a relative or family friend who was a lawyer and that was
Someone
willing to file
important.
some paperwork. Or yeah, like she must have known someone somewhat important. The vessel's name would be changed again in 1939 to Regalia, and she would continue to operate in the Rossman fleet before sinking in the Georges River off Tarrant Point in 2004.
Wow. Did not expect that date to come out there.
No, and there's actually, I need to find this picture of her. She does not look like what you think she would look like.
You have no idea what I think she looks like.
I gotta see if I found it earlier when I was just looking around at stuff. And like she was unrecognizable in like the most recent picture. I of course can't find it now. But yeah, that is the Rodney disaster. The ones like this are the ones that actually like get to you a little bit. Because it's small enough and personal enough that like you can find all the names involved and stuff like that. And just because I think we've talked about this a lot, when it's a merchant marine or a naval vessel, people are doing their jobs. And sometimes bad things happen. And like people knew that when they signed up for it. But when you buy a ticket to go on a pleasure cruise, you're not really expecting that today's the day you might drown in Sydney Harbor.
You're at very least expecting the ferry operator to like get you back to the dock safely.
Yeah, it's a very different thing than, your vessel's going down in combat or you've sailed into a storm, but you're, on a freighter. Like to some degree, you've signed up for those things. Yeah, this is just normal people going about their life. So it's definitely a little bit more of a tragic story.
I think perspective wise, also when you have certainly when there's two ships that are, sailing either in tandem or they have some connection as the ferry does here to the Louisville, when one of those vessels watches another one go down, there's that added element, I think, of, I don't know, there's an added horror to that, I think, from a shipwreck perspective, where you're on that other ship seeing this happen. There was an element of that with like the White Ship disaster, where there's some accounts that, said that the people in the White Ship or the people in the King's ship could hear, this strike the rocks, and they could hear everybody in the water and couldn't do anything about it. Yeah,
there's so many people out here on the harbor that day, and like most of them can't even do anything to help. All you can do is watch. That has to be a pretty helpless feeling. But you also get to see these acts of bravery. Like look at the jumping off of the deck of a cruiser into the harbor is a pretty ballsy thing to do.
Some of those guys on the Louisville probably thought that was the most interesting day they'd ever have in the U.S. Navy.
Yeah, it would only get more interesting from here. So yeah, that little bit of a smaller one this time to kick it off, but definitely an interesting one. Not necessarily a World War II story, but World War II adjacent, I would say.
Should we develop some kind of way to farm some extra engagement at the end of episodes with a rating system? We could rate the shipwrecks based on like goriness, based on, I don't know, total tonnage is like, that's an objective verifiable fact. I guess that wouldn't really make sense for a ranking system. We can work on it. We'll develop something for season 6.
Yeah, so I think that'll be all for this one. We're working on some other things right now. Got a couple irons in the fire, but this is one we wanted to go ahead and get out and kick off the season with. Hope everybody's enjoyed it. Hope everyone's enjoying that Guadalcanal series. That was a lot of fun to put together. We've got a lot of good stuff planned for the Patreon this upcoming season. And yeah, we're looking forward to continuing on in this journey. So thank you guys for listening, and we will be in touch soon.
Hey listeners, Tanner here with a reminder that if you want more Beyond the Breakers, check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/beyondthebreakers. You can join at the $3 Able C Person tier for an extra bonus episode each month. These bonus episodes usually cover some form of maritime-related media. Films like The Perfect Storm, Midway, and The Finest Hours. Novels like The Seawolf and A High Wind in Jamaica. Or acclaimed television programs like Below Deck. Sometimes these $3 bonus releases are expansions on main feed episodes. You can also join the $5 Second Mate tier for an additional bonus episode each month on top of the first one. These episodes tend to center around an article discussion or a piece of maritime-related history, though not always necessarily a shipwreck. And now, in Season 6, you have the option to subscribe for a year up front and save 20% compared to paying month by month. Finally, join the humble yet vibrant Beyond the Breakers Discord to join in the conversation, sometimes show-related, frequently not. The link to join the Discord can be found in a public post at the top of the Patreon page. If you listen through the end of this episode, you'll get a preview of a recent bonus series on the naval battles of the Guadalcanal campaign. We hope to see many of you over on Patreon this season. As always, thank you for listening, and we will talk with you again soon.
The tallest poppy, the first one cut. Life of devotion, never good enough. There's no outshining the rising sun. The roots seek for a taste of the garden's love. The crooked nail gets hammered down. A seed planted into fallow ground. The tallest poppy, the first one cut. The roots seek for a taste of the garden's love.
Even with that crushing defeat dealt to the Japanese Navy, Japan still occupied a bunch of territory in the Pacific that the US was interested in pushing them off of. So with Australia and New Zealand available as staging grounds, it makes sense to start this process with the nearby Solomon Islands. Nearby relative, of course. There's about 1,000 miles between the Solomons and Australia.
It is funny when you start talking about what's nearby out in the Pacific.
Looking on a map, it is crazy how close the furthest extent of Japanese forces come to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the Pacific island hopping campaigns, the major clashes would center around whichever island in a given chain was or could be outfitted with an airstrip. In the case of the Solomons, one of these was Guadalcanal. With the U.S. starting operations in the Solomons, this is a starting point for land operations as a way to sweep the Japanese away from Australia, with a longer-term goal of pushing through the Solomons and into the Bismarck archipelago to neutralize the major Japanese base at Rabaul.
I feel like Rabaul is one of the ones you always hear them talk about in Black Sheep Squadron.
That's where I first was introduced to Rabaul. I still think of Pappy Boyington when I hear Rabaul, especially because in the show, they do give it this sort of almost mystical quality. I don't know that you ever actually like see it or learn anything about it, but it's referred to a lot, and it has this sense of being this impregnable bastion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I mean, it kind of is. We kind of just go around it.
That is my favorite part of the Pacific campaign. It's like, not that one.
David Attenborough. I don't like this base. Skip it. The Japanese High Command had envisioned a scenario where Imperial forces could continue pushing south and east, cutting off Australia and eventually even pushing American forces out of Samoa and Fiji. Which is crazy, kind of like you said with the Pacific. It's so big that all these islands, I think, to us kind of seem like they're all over there. But this is a huge distance they're thinking of trying to cover here.
I mean, even like going to Hawaii, we stayed on the Big Island, and even flying over to Honolulu, it was like a 45-minute flight. Like it's not just around the corner.
Like these are massive expanses we're talking about here. So in Neptune's Inferno, James Hornfisher describes this as Japan essentially stepping on a tripwire that spurred the US into action.
As anyone could see by taking a compass and drawing a 250-mile radius centered on Guadalcanal's airstrip, it would, when operational, enable Japanese planes to threaten the sea lanes to Australia, whose protection was long one of the Navy's core missions. Construction of the airfield might have been low-order business for Japanese forces, spread thinly along a multi-continental oceanic perimeter, but its discovery would draw the fleet straight to Guadalcanal.
Also, at this point in the war, post-Midway, this is early-ish to mid-1942. This is a great opportunity for Ernest King to land a blow against Japan. Their carrier threat is largely neutralized by the Battle of Midway. They do still have more, but they've lost a lot of them, and hopefully seize the initiative in the Pacific. what I like about Neptune's Inferno is that it gets into some of the higher up wrangling among the Allied commanders, across services and across theaters as to where U.S. efforts should be concentrated. When we get into the war, we come to this agreement, with the Russians, with the British, that we are going to do Europe first. We're going to give Hitler what for, and then we will deal with our own thing over in the Pacific, which is not hugely popular with Americans. A lot of Americans obviously want Japanese blood because they're the ones who attacked us.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably a very tough thing to sell, because you do, and obviously as a nation, we were playing the neutral game with Germany, but there was a not insignificant portion of Americans who weren't unsympathetic to Germany.
Yeah, that and especially given the two options of well, who would you rather go to war with? And it's well, the ones who killed 3,000 of our boys.
Not to mention, you might have someone who's second or third generation German or first generation immigrant German as a neighbor, but you probably don't have any Japanese people around unless you live on the West Coast. It's a lot easier to attack and want to hate the thing you don't interact with.
It's kind of the public sentiment, but in a practical military sense, the U.S. does have responsibilities to Europe, which is itself a hard sell for the Navy, because the Navy knows it's not going to be doing as much in Europe. The Navy knows it can win a war in the Pacific. So yeah, there's just a lot of, arguments over, where is this particular army division going to be sent? Where are these ships going to go? Where are these planes going to go? That's a big one. Is early in the war, a lot of planes are tied up in European operations. And with no big continental invasion in the near future, Ernest King sees his opportunity to say, hey, well, let's use some of these resources and let's hit the Japanese in the Solomons. So I kind of made these in a weird, disjointed order. But U.S. troop landings began on August 7th, 1942. By the end of the next day, they had captured the incomplete airstrip at Lunga Point on the north shore of the island. So this is what is eventually going to be Henderson Field.
Mm-hmm.
American troops also occupied Tulagi across the Sound from Guadalcanal. This is the body of water that is not yet called Iron Bottom Sound, but it will be, for reasons. Backtracking a little bit, the Japanese had only had forces on Guadalcanal since June. It was about 2,000 engineers and workers engaged in constructing the airfield, and really just a couple hundred actual troops. They had landed on Tulagi, the much smaller island across the Sound, in May to begin constructing a seaplane station. And then the following month, after realizing, hey, that bit across the water looks perfect for an airstrip, crossed over and started work on the airstrip. After learning of the Japanese seizure of the islands and their potential use to prey on shipping lines to Australia, the decision was made in early July for the U.S. to engage in Operation Watchtower.